Thank you, Alexandra, for the introduction. Today, indeed, it's a webinar about AP Invoice automation for Oracle Financials Cloud. So it's a live webinar. It's not scripted or pre-recorded. So it's a fully live webinar. Today, it's a focus on Oracle Financials Cloud. But having said that, if you are using Oracle E-Business Suite, so we have the solution available for Oracle EBS as well. For today, moving to my next slide now. Yeah. I have a small agenda, so I start with an introduction, a couple of slides about the AP Invoice Automation Solution, so giving you a bit of a high-level idea of what we do with the system. And then I move over to a demo, so a real-life demo, and we're going to process a couple of invoices, like PO invoices, non-PO invoices, so you have a good understanding and a good view on how the application looks like and how it works. And as Alexandra said, at the end, we have the questions and answers. Okay, so first about myself, my name is Wijnand Heijnen. So this is a typical Dutch name, Wijnand Heijnen, 43 years old. I live in the Netherlands, so that's where APRO is based off. I'm married, and I have twin boys, 11 years old, pretty handful, playing Fortnite well, all day if they would want to do that. Maybe if you have kids yourself, you know that. I work already 15 years at APRO Software Solutions. I started as a consultant, always doing implementations on the AP side. So I went from US to India and everything in between. And today I'm a senior manager for the product APRO Imaging. I would like to tell you something about APRO Software Solutions as well. So we are a company founded in 1998. So we are already a long time on the market. And basically what we do, we are an independent software vendor, meaning that we develop and commercialize applications that work specifically on Oracle E-Business Suite and Oracle Financials Cloud. So it does not connect to SAP, it does not connect to Microsoft Dynamics. So we have a very high focus on Oracle. So meaning that we have a lot of functional knowledge about Oracle, so that we know about setups, we know how processes work, but also technical knowledge. So the developers have a lot of knowledge about the database side, all the environments, etc. It started all in the Netherlands, so that's where the headquarters are. We have an office in Austin, Texas right now, and that is just to support our customers who are on the other side of the ocean. So as I said, today we have a focus on APRO Cloud Solutions. So this is the solution that connects with Oracle Financials Cloud. And in APRO Cloud Solutions, we have 3 modules. So APRO Imaging for the AP Invoice automation. So we talk about that today. We have an application that's called APRO Banking Gateway. And basically what that does is automating your payments. So if you do your payments to the bank, we can pick up the payment batch, convert it to the specific bank file, and with the host-to-host connection, we can automate that whole process. Also the other way around, when you receive your bank statements, we pick it up from the bank, and we extract that data for your reconciliations and your cash applications. So that's on the banking side. Third module, interfacing cloud. So for example, if you have legacy systems and that information needs to come from that legacy system into Oracle Financials Cloud, for example, customers or customer transactions, maybe purchase orders. So we can pick up that information and then interface that into Oracle Financials Cloud. We can validate the information, we can enrich that information. And with a monitor, you can exactly see what is happening. So it's not a black box for interfacing, but it's a very clear overview of what you're doing. Okay, now that sounds good, right? So it's a cloud solution, it connects with Oracle, but how do you connect with Oracle Financials Cloud? So how do you integrate with that system? Because that's a very key element. You know, you need to integrate with a system to make use of your suppliers, to make use of your purchase orders, your GL codings. So how do you do that? And what we offer is an easy integration with a low IT involvement. because probably you're thinking like, how do you connect to our Oracle Financials Cloud? Do we, as a company, do we need to build interfaces? Do we need to maintain those interfaces? So that's not the case. So that's something that we offer out of the box, an integration. And I'm going to explain you a little bit how we do that. So I think this slide, it's a very important slide. It's a lot of information, maybe on some ends a little bit technical, but if you want to work with Oracle, if you do purchase order matching, you do that online level. So, and if you do it online level, you need all that information, like all the detailed information. The only way you can do that if you have a high integration with Oracle. And now with Oracle Financials Cloud, you have your Oracle Financials Cloud running in a data center of Oracle. So for example, you have your Oracle Financials Cloud in the UK. So what we can do then is we can deploy our application also in that same data center in the UK. Then we connect our solution with your Oracle Financials Cloud solution. It's a one-time setup, and we only do that with standard Oracle features. So features that Oracle supports out of the box. That's how we can connect. That's how we can make use of your data. So that is to recognize your suppliers, to work with your purchase orders, to work with your GL codes. So it's all standard features. And that's how we can insert all the data into Oracle Financials Cloud in a way how Oracle supports that. Now, if the users needs to log in into the system, we also provide the single sign-on, so in a very secure way that they can log in into the system. So that's done based on Oracle's single sign-on, or if you have like a third-party supplier like an Okta or an Azure Active Directory, we support that as well. There's a secure line. We have an allow list so that we can very control who has access to the application. So that's a security, but also we as APRO, as a company, we have our certifications in place as well. Like the ISO certifications, we are audited every year. We have our SOC 2 reports, and basically as we speak, we're building up the report right now as an audit. And the last part, of course, encryption. So all the data in rest and in transit, that's all encrypted. So it's a very important part, that's integration with your Oracle Financials Cloud. And another part of that integration is, as you can see here on the picture, so this must look like familiar to you. So what we can do here is we can activate a tile, and based on that tile from the springboard, you can open up the APRO application. So for the users who log in, they log into Oracle, and from Oracle, just as they enter payables or general ledger, they can enter the APRO solution for invoice processing. Okay, now we move over to APRO Imaging, so the solution for accounts payable invoice automation. And basically, I can explain you the application with just one single slide. So what we do is we can pick up invoices from different sources. So that can be an email account, can be one email account, can be multiple email accounts. If you still receive traditional invoices like paper invoices, traditional mail, you can scan them, you can store them on a location, and then APRO can pick them up from that location. Or maybe a third option, and that is a little bit the future. We see that coming up in Europe a lot, electronic invoicing, so XML invoices. And maybe if you have suppliers that are connected to the PEPL network, I have one slide later on about PEPL. We are an access point on the PEPL network, so we can pick up your invoices that are sent over that network, pick them up and process these into Oracle Financials Cloud. So all these three types of invoices, we pick them up, they go into the APRO solution, and based on that integration, we always make use of your master data for recognitions. So we pick up something from the invoice, like a bank account or a VAT number, a purchase order number, or maybe like a zip code. So that's information that we pick up from the invoice, and then we compare that with your master data. And based on that, we can recognize your suppliers. So we have many elements to recognize your suppliers. So the better you create a new supplier in Oracle, so you create a new supplier, you add a supplier side to it, you add a bank account, a VAT number, you make that set up as good as possible, the better the recognition will be. Now, we're going to process a complete invoice, meaning PO-based invoices and non-PO-based invoices. So for purchase order-based invoices, we do the recognitions on line level. And for non-purchase order-based invoices, we have accounting rules. So something on the invoice, and then we connect a GL code to that. And then you can have that automation as well. And in the system, there's a lot of machine learning. So it's a big word today, but there's real machine learning in the system. So it learns from previous processed invoices, but also from user actions. Now, if you have like 100% recognition, so we have all the header details, we have all the line details, then that invoice can go touchless to Oracle Financials Cloud. So meaning a straight through processing. And you can be in control of that straight through processing. So meaning if you have a look at your top suppliers, so normally that's how we start with an implementation. We ask, okay, you give us your top suppliers, and we're going to work on that recognition. So, and if you can automate those top suppliers, then, well, it's a huge win for the AP department, of course. It saves you a lot of time. So, and you can enable that STP, that straight through processing, like supplier by supplier. So you can be really in control what supplier can go directly to Oracle and what supplier is absolutely not able to go directly to Oracle, because these suppliers are always there. And if there is something wrong with an invoice, for example, we could not identify the purchase order, or maybe a bank account number on the invoice does not reflect in your master data, so it's not there, then there are exceptions. And those exceptions, they go into the application itself. So there is a user interface. Users can log into that, and there they can edit invoices, and if they are complete, then they can send them to Oracle. And we have business rules in the system so that we can route invoices to different queues. So we call them a work list. And invoices can be routed based on well, information from the invoice. For example, missing master data. So if we detect something on the invoice that does not reflect your master data, we can send it to a specific queue. We can route invoices based on business units or maybe on legal entities. So we have set up for that in the system so that you are fully in control of what is happening with your invoices. Now, in the end, if the invoices, if they end up in Oracle Financials Cloud, then the invoice image is attached. So users who use the Oracle workflow, so they can see the invoice image when they approve invoices. What we support as well are the supporting documents. So if you have a supplier that sends in maybe, for example, an additional XML file that contains detailed lines, so we can add that as an attachment as well. And the last one, if you receive XML invoices and that contains an invoice image, like an embedded invoice image, we extract that, attach that to the invoice record, or if there's no invoice image inside the XML, we create it based on a dummy, basically a dummy invoice on an RTF file. So there's always something that is connected to the invoice record in Oracle, so that the users always have something to approve. Okay, so that's high level about the application. And of course, in the demo, I will show you a lot of other stuff. Now, one more thing about electronic invoicing. I already mentioned it a couple of times, XML, electronic invoicing, but also like a PEPL connection. I know that in the UK, it's from the National Health Services. So if you as a supplier, you need to send invoices to hospitals, it must be in an electronic format and can be done via the PEPL network. Well, APRO is a certified access point on that network, meaning that we can fetch invoices from that specific network and process these automatically into Oracle Financials Cloud. But if you are not connected to PEPL, or maybe your suppliers are not connected to PEPL, but they can send in XML invoices, maybe via email, that's not a problem as well, because we can pick them up and we can process these in Oracle as well. So that's about the electronic invoicing. So it's a bit for the future. We can see it in the Nordics, like Denmark, Sweden, Norway. They are ahead of most countries, and maybe in Belgium, Netherlands, Germany a little bit. It's starting to evolve. But I think that electronic invoicing is really the future for invoice processing. Now, then my last slide before we move over to the real life demo. If you have a solution like this, invoice processing, you need overviews, you need insights. And that is what we provide with this solution. So we have dashboards, so providing you KPIs. Here you can see who is doing what, how many invoices did we receive, how many invoices still outstanding in the work lists. We have the reports that we can send out to users. And also in terms of recognitions, this is not a black box. We give you full insight how the recognition works, how good the recognition is, and if you can improve some of the recognitions. So full insight of what is happening. Okay, now we move over to the demo, and I prepared a couple of things for that. So I think everybody can still see my screen. So I have a couple of invoices here. Well, for example, Dometic, let me open up. It's a PDF attachment attached to this invoice. So let me close this one again. And some more invoices here. So what I do right now, and I'm doing this just for demo purposes. I am moving these invoices to my inbox because this is an automated process. So what we do with the system is that we connect to your email account. It can be one, can be multiple. So there's no need to forward invoices to a specific other account, adding, well, other kind of attributes to a subject. So we just connect directly with your email account. Now, there's a schedule on the background, checking every 2 minutes, every 15 minutes, depending on your needs. If there are some new invoices, if yes, we pick them up and start processing these. And these are stored as well in backup folders. So as you can see, we picked them up, and now the solution is starting sending these images to the application. We're doing OCR, so the optical character recognition, and in that same time, we're recognizing who the supplier is, invoice number, invoice date, invoice amounts, invoice lines, etc. So if there are invoices that are enabled for straight-through processing, then they go directly to Oracle. So I have a couple of them in the system as well, so we can check that. And the other ones, we're going to process these via the user interface. Now, as I said, we can log in via Oracle itself. So I'm going to log in into Oracle Financials Cloud here. Okay, let me refresh here. Okay. Maybe I waited too long. Okay. That should work. Now, as you saw that we have also a tile in Oracle Financials Cloud available. So I'm going to the end where APRO is, APRO, and here I have a tile that has access to my demo environment. So I'm logging in here, and I can log in with my single sign-on. So here we are in the application itself. Now, myself as a user, I am authorized for the module AP Invoice Automation. So let me go there. And here you can directly see some of these dashboards. So here are a couple of dashboards that I activated. So for example, who is processing how many invoices? Well, in my environment, I'm the only one. But also how many invoices do I have in certain work lists? So I have a non-purchase order work list with 7 invoices. I have a purchase order work list with 5 invoices. So in these work lists, you can create them yourself and you can maintain them yourself. It depends a bit on how you would like to work with the system. So we have customers that says, well, we just need 2, PO, non-PO. Others, they say, well, we have for each legal entity, we have 1 work list and you need to route these invoices to every single work list. So that's a possibility as well. Now, let's have a look at the invoice history. So I want to have a look at what did we receive today. And this is an overview of the invoices that we received today. I did some invoice processing this morning as well. But what you can see here is the status of these invoices. So we loaded up some new invoices, and here you can see, for example, that I have invoices that are sent to OFC. So meaning there is like an STP activated, like a touchless invoice processing. So the system is currently, it says, okay, 100% recognition. These invoices, they go directly to Oracle. Some of them are already done. So these invoices are already in Oracle Financials Cloud. And I have others that says needs revalidation. And these invoices we're going to process out of the application itself. Well, here you see a rejected as well. I'm going to show you that in the application just to reject an invoice. So if there is something wrong with an invoice, it's a duplicate invoice, for example, or maybe purchase order is not correct, you can reject an invoice. So that's all what you can see here in the system. All right, so I move over to the invoice workbench, and we will start with a purchase order based invoice. So here you can see all the different work lists and also how many invoices there are currently in that work list. Now, I select PO invoices, click on search, and here I have the invoices that needs revalidation. So we need to check if it's okay, yes or no. Now, let me start with the Public Health England. So I click on the invoice number and then we enter into the workbench. Now, what you see here is on the right side, you have your invoice image, and on the left side, we have all the data we're going to process to Oracle. So in the top, you have invoice header information. In the middle, the invoice lines that we will send to Oracle. And in the lower part, you have mainly Oracle financials information. So for example, in this case, it's a purchase order based invoice. And what you see here on the PO lines tab is are all the outstanding PO lines from Oracle procurement. Okay, so let's start at the top with the general information. So what you see here is at least minimum that you need to process an invoice header. So we have the supplier name, supplier site, the business unit, invoice number, the amounts, currency, and in this case also a PO number. And let's not forget the invoice date and the GL date. So this is information that you need at a minimum. So how does that work? So how can we recognize your supplier? So what we do here is, this is the invoice image, and on the background, the OCR is running, optical character recognition. So we fetch all the text from this invoice image. And here on the invoice, you, for example, you can see that there is a bank account number or maybe an IBAN number. So what you can see here, maybe there's a VAT number, the PO number is on the invoice. We have the address of the supplier on the invoice. So that's all information that you, as a company, you store that on supplier site level. So address level, site level, that's where you have that information of this specific supplier. That supplier puts that information on his invoice. Now, with the optical character recognition, we fetch all the text and we can recognize all these elements. So like an IBAN number, a VAT number. And with that information, we go into your Oracle database and we see, hey, this is based on that information, that's Public Health England. And it belongs to supplier site, Public Health E. So based on that information, we can recognize your suppliers. So we have many elements, like I said, an IBAN, a VAT, a PO number, can be an email address, can be the address of the site itself or the address, a zip code. So a lot of information we can use to perfectly match with your supplier site. We also recognize, of course, the other elements. So basically how we do that, that is done based on one search criteria. So we have a lot of preceded search criteria in the system. So for example, for invoice number, a lot of words, how your supplier can put invoice number on the invoice, like invoice, hashtag, invoice no, invoice number, and in many different languages. So based on that search criteria, we find a number. So once we have found it, we also store the location. So with the next invoice that we know, okay, we have a search criteria, we have a location, And we also store a mask of that invoice number. So once we process that first invoice, we directly have 3 elements to recognize that invoice number. So that's also a part of that machine learning. So that goes all automatically. And that goes for all the different elements, also for your invoice amounts, for your tax amounts, for your invoice dates. So that's all part of the learning curve. So in a very short time, you have a very quick learning curve. Now, what we have additionally here is a tab additional information. So what we can do here is we can activate additional fields. So fields that you would like to see during invoice processing, or information that we need to pick up from the invoice and to send additionally to Oracle Financials Cloud. So in this case, I have, for example, payment terms. And then you can say, hey, that is something that you can default on supplier side level. But sometimes you would like to be in control. You would like to see it. So what we can do is we can activate an additional field, we call it payment terms. And behind that field, we can add a query to pick up the default from this supplier side. But also there's a list of values behind it so that you can be in control and you can change it if needed. Can be for pay group, can be for payment method. You can make certain fields mandatory. We can show here other defaults like what is the primary bank account, what is the VAT from this supplier side. So this is information that you can set up additionally. It can be maybe 1 additional field, it can be maybe 10 additional fields. So basically that's up to you and how you would like to work with it. And we can pick up information with OCR as well and reflect that in one of these variable fields if we need to process that information. So in that sense, we are very flexible in what you would like to see in the application and what you would like to send to Oracle as well. Now, in this case, it's a purchase order based invoice. So what happens here is we found a PO number on the invoice and we directly fetch all outstanding PO lines from Oracle Purchasing. So that's here. So the information that you see here on this PO, this comes from Oracle. I cannot change this information, right? It's just a view information from Oracle. Now, what we do here, we have a automated PO line recognition functionality in the system. So meaning is what we do is that we fetch the PO lines from Oracle. So we know, okay, there's a purchase order, there's a quantity, there's a price, maybe there is an article number on the invoice, maybe there is a supplier item number on the invoice. And we're going to compare the invoice lines, how we found it on the invoice with the outstanding PO lines. And based on these different elements, like I said, supplier item, article number, description, part of description, quantity, price, we're going to compare all that information. And if we have a match, we add that invoice line to the invoice line section. Now, in this case, basically it's pretty straightforward invoice, 1 single line. So we added that single line, but we can also do it with multiple lines and have an example of that as well. Now, and as you can see with colors, we indicate that we found all the correct information. Now, what we do additionally is we're going to check, are there any validations on the invoice? Because the invoice ended up here in the application, meaning that there is something wrong with the invoice. So me as a user, I have to check that. So here on the validation holds, I can see everything that is not correct with the invoice. Now, in this case, the STP stands for straight through processing. So the touchless processing is not allowed. So I don't want this supplier to go directly to Oracle. Now, and I just did that for demo purposes, of course, because I wanted to show you this type of invoice. So what I can do right now, if everything is correct, I approve the recognition, I approve this validation hold, and then the invoice goes directly to Oracle and the invoice image is attached. What happens next is that my next invoice appears on my screen, so I can start working on that one. So let's do that. So approve it. Do I want to process it? Yes. And then that goes to Oracle, and then my next invoice appears on my screen. Okay, so this is another example that I wanted to show you because the first invoice, it was basically a one-to-one invoice, like the PO line was exactly the same on the invoice, but we support partial PO processing as well. So as you can see here, if I go to the PO lines, so quantity is 2, and for my second line, the quantity is 80. But on my invoice itself, so let me make that a bit bigger, there is only 1 and there's 40 pieces each, right? So now with that automated recognition, so we can recognize also these partial deliveries. So here we recognized 1 and we recognized 40, meaning if you have partial purchase orders, you have partial deliveries, we can recognize these quantities or maybe the differences in price. So we recognize the lines, we have it connected with the correct outstanding PO line, and we can process these as well. So in the end, if you feel confident that for example, for Eric's, that the recognition is good, you can activate it for straight-through processing, and the next time the invoice will go directly to Oracle Financials. So this is how you can build up that automation. So here are my validations, and again, this was also for S2P not allowed. So let me approve that one as well. Here we go. And then, I want to show you one other one. This is the last one on purchase order based invoices. Dog is good. And this one has multiple invoice lines. So even if there are multiple PO lines on the invoice, we can also recognize that. So each and every single line for invoice process recognition. So as you can see, if it's one line, if it's partial purchase order matching, if you have a lot of PO lines on the invoice, we can handle those purchase order based invoices and help you with that automation. All right, now let me process this one as well. And then I move over to a non-purchase order based invoice because we can get some automation there as well. So I cancel this one. I move over to my work list non-PO invoices. Here we go. And well, let me directly start with here NTP distribution. So this is an interesting one because here everything is red, so we're missing some information here. And on the validation also you can see that. So one, S2P is not allowed, that's by default. And the other one, the total line amount is not equal to the header amount. So I'm missing some information here. But what it did recognize here is freight charges. So there is some freight charges on the invoice. So from the setup, we have like recognition like freight charges or transportation costs or administration costs. It recognizes those lines and automatically adds these lines to the line section. Now, maybe for the supplier, I did not set up a line recognition, or maybe it missed something in the recognitions. So I can manually add a line. So that's something that you can do. So basically all the information that you see here in the application, you can change it. You can edit that information. So you can also add a line yourself. So let's add an invoice line here. And now let me pick up that information here. So it's a line amount. Let's go. Well, let me type that in. In this case, it's a 0 tax. I can add an account distribution here. So basically what you see here are all your GL codes from Oracle. So there's no duplicate setup. If you deactivate or if you add a new account, it's reflected here. So I will select all the different segments here. And what I wanted to show you here as well is that we also do the cross validations or the related segments. So APRO is checking what you entered here if that is allowed to go to Oracle, yes or no. So in this case, it's a related set and this combination is not allowed. So I will change that. Now I added very in a manual way a line and I can process this invoice. As you can see, it's all green, so it's good. We're good to go. But well, it's a manual way and sometimes I don't like that to do that all manually. So let's delete that one. And what we can do, so what a feature that we have in the system is, it's called previous invoice lines. So from this supplier side, we can fetch all in a certain date range, all previous processed invoice lines and that are validated in Oracle. So let me search, and here I can see what did we use the last time. So I can see the last invoice number, code combinations that were used, and maybe if you're using, for example, project information, that's not the case in this for this invoice, but there you could see project information as well. Now let me just reuse this invoice line and add that line here. So it takes over, in this case, also the same amount because it's actually the same invoice amount, but it takes that into account as well. If the total invoice amount is higher or lower, it just pro rata recalculates that invoice amount. But it do uses the tax code, and it do uses the code combination. So as you can see here, very simply added a single invoice line based on previous processed information from the system. So we added that information here. Now let me validate this invoice, and if APRO says okay, it's correct, and it did a validation with Oracle, then the invoice goes to Oracle as well. So let's approve it. Here we go, and my next invoice image appears on my screen as well. So that's for processing non-PO invoices. So what you can see here from this one, the British Gas, is it's also a non-PO based invoice, but there is automatically a line added. And this is also based on those accounting rules, so that we pick something from the invoice and that we connect a GL code to that. And that is how you can build up that account or that automation for non-purchase order based invoices. So it can be just for one single line, so that you pick up the total excluding VAT, and APRO detects then the VAT amount. Or if you want to do it line by line, so if you have an invoice with 40 lines that you would like to recognize every line. Or maybe if you want to pick up the totals, that's fine as well. So you can do that in the setup of the system. So you really can build up that automation. You can be in control of that automation. Okay, so in this case, we have no other validations as well. So let me approve this one. Yes, and then that goes to Oracle. So yeah. Okay, now we did some invoice processing. So let's, okay, one more thing that I want to show you. Yeah. So if there is something wrong with an invoice, you can reject an invoice. So say, okay, don't want to process this one here, reject invoice, and there are some preceded rejections. So you can add that yourself to the application, or you can just type in something yourself. So that is a possibility. Maybe you say, hey, we received this invoice by email, and I want to check if there's some additional information in that email. So you can also download the email, so the original email here. You can have a look at that. So then it opens it up in your default client. And maybe if you say, okay, I want to send this invoice with some comments to somebody, you can also send email. Maybe you want to send it back to the supplier, or maybe like internally. And you can add some information here, and the invoice image is automatically attached here. So that's something additionally that you can do with the system. All right, now let's cancel this invoice. Well, let's move to Oracle, because I want to show you how the invoices end up there. So I'm here in Oracle, and I go to payables, invoices, and here we are. So let me go to the correct entry. And as you can see here, we have some of these invoices that we processed today. So let me have a look at, for example, Eric's, the one with the PO partial matching. Okay. It opens up the invoice. Thinking. That takes a while. There it is. Okay. So this is the information in Oracle. You can see here there are two lines. So if I go to purchase order information, we can see quantity 1, 40, so partial PO matching. And the invoice image is here, attachments. So let's open it up with Acrobat Reader. And here is my invoice image that is attached to that invoice record. And people in the workflow, they can view that invoice image as well. So as you can see, we process the invoices, and basically on Oracle techniques, the invoice information is directly available in Oracle, and that invoice image is here as well. Okay, now let's move to one more feature here. So I want to show you a little bit about invoice management. So let's go to today. What we did today, search. So this is the information that we processed today. All the invoices, different status again, and you can see here, most of them are done. One that needs revalidation, it's in the work list, non-purchase order based invoices. So you have a pretty good overview of your outstanding invoices. Now, if you want to see, hey, we have an OCR tool, and how good is that application? Now, let me just fetch some information from a month ago. And here you can see, okay, who is my top supplier who sends in the most invoices, and how good is that recognition for that specific supplier? So how good is the recognition on the business unit, the supplier sites, invoice dates, amounts, etc. And are we good to go for straight through processing, meaning that we also recognize all the different lines? So with this information, you can be in control of what is happening. So with the recognitions, and even if you have a look, so these are 15 invoices, and these are the different 15 invoices that we processed. So you can also see then, hey, are there maybe any header changes, and who changed something on the header? Are there any invoice line changes, and who changed that information on the line? So everything that we do in the system, it's recorded, it's available for you as a user, and you can see it, and you can use it to make the system better, and some pretty good insights for your own invoice processing. Okay, so having that said, it's almost, we have 15 minutes left, so I want to move over to the last slides that I have. So I want to share with you one customer case, and then we move over to some questions. So one of our UK customers in the animal healthcare, they have 152,000 invoices on a yearly base. And you can see that they receive between 2,500, 3,000 invoices on a weekly basis. So they said, well, we need a very high focus on automation because we don't want to process these invoices manually. We need too many resources for that. So there was a high focus on automation, and currently we can process 75% of these invoices. They can go completely STP, straight through processing, or touchless invoice processing to Oracle. So we did that in an implementation in less than 30 days. And for them, the return on investment was within 1 year. And as they said themselves, the APRO solution was a success of the Oracle Fusion implementation. So that was for us, of course, a huge compliment. Well, and then one last summary. So the APRO Imaging solution, so the AP Invoice automation, it's an integrated solution, always using your master data, your suppliers, your purchase orders, your GL codes. You have the possibility for touchless processing, so a real automated way of processing. You have full insight of what is happening in KPIs, also in recognitions. It's not a black box. And with APRO Imaging, you are ready for the future. So if that electronic invoicing gets a boost, then you have a solution that can pick up XML invoices and process these in your Oracle Financials Cloud. So that was my last slide. Let's move over to some questions